Have you ever heard of giants before? Oh, you'll know them by their big size and their sayings. You know the sayings, things like grum, 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 and me crunch your bones. Well, guess what? We all know that giants belong in things called stories. And telling stories is a talent, just like singing and dancing. Here's story writer John Kurtze reading from his book, The Littlest Hunter.
The journey begins. Our story begins after the Civil War around 1870, when families were starting to explore the American West. As eastern states became crowded, many began considering moving west. Families looking for a new start were becoming part of the westward expansion. They helped start new settlements. All the newspapers described how families were heading west to homestead for the free land. Teachers, carpenters, farmers, and many craftsmen felt that they would find success in the new territory. In Boston, Massachusetts, we find the Hunter family. Mr. Hunter, a carpenter. Mrs. Hunter, a school teacher. Mila, about 8 years old. And Johnny Bill, or as he was known, Little J.B. He was a small boy, inquisitive 6-year-old who was excited to move west. Several years earlier, Mr. Hunter's brothers, Edward and Gerald, traveled west to homestead the free land. These brothers had been writing Mr. Hunter back and forth. We want you to move to Fort Hunter. Bring the family to the trading post. The Hunter family decided it was time to move west, so Mr. Hunter accepted the invitation to move to the northern Kentucky. Mr. Hunter's brothers let him use their wagon to move the family west. He looked forward to driving the wagon to Fort Hunter with his family and children. The Hunters were going to claim their piece of the unsettled land. Each family member gathered precious belongings that would make their journey with them. Mrs. Hunter bundled together all her books and materials. She planned to start a school. Mr. Hunter packed all of his tools. Mila, she gathered all her dolls and that her mother had made for her and then put them in a wooden box that her father had built. Little J.B. had his picture book his mother had made for him, filled with animals' pictures given to him by a friend who was a photographer. That book was his favorite. J.B. and the mother would look through all the pictures and he would recite the names of each animal on each page. Mr. Hunter planned to use the trading post wagon and horses, adding his own team of 4 horses to his brother's team, and hook it to the Conestoga wagon loaded with all their belongings. The family packed these items in their big wagon. The wagon would be the Hunter's family's new home until they reached Fort Hunter. Mr. Hunter looked forward to building their new home. The wagon was loaded with everything that the family would need to camp on the trail as they traveled west. The very last item to be loaded was Johnny Bill's bed. It was built by his father. Mrs. Hunter made sure there was space in the very back of the wagon to fit his bed perfectly. With the pegs in place to keep the bed from rocking, J.B. would be able to play safely in the bed while the wagon moved west. With all the items that were safely packed, Mr. Hunter ensured the pin keeping the tailgate on the back of the wagon was in place. Once his final inspection was done, the family set out on their adventure. As Mr. Hunter's family climbed into the wagon, J.B. said, "How long will it take to get there, Dad?" J.B.'s father replied, "With good weather, our trip will take about 3 to 4 weeks, as I told your uncles. Even with good weather, our travel will be slow. Since extra horses have to be pulled on the loaded wagon, we want to be very careful, so if we encounter bad weather, it might take longer to get there. Your uncles know we are leaving today, and it'll take about 5 weeks for us to get there if the weather is bad. They want us to get to Fort Hunter as much as we want to be there, and we'll be happy with them when they arrive." What will be the rest of the story? That's for another day.
John Kurtze, what a wonderful story. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
My pleasure. It's one of my passions of being able to share with children. These are the same stories I told my children over the last 40 years, so it's kind of a labor of love.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about the origin of The Littlest Hunter. So these are based on stories that you told your children?
They're based on the stories that I've told my children and grandchildren. And then basically I would gather in the bedroom, sitting with them, what would you like the story to be about? And they would all add different things. And it was all based on the premise of the Hunter family, which would be moving west to Fort Hunter, northern Kentucky. And their whole point was that they moved there to start over. And one of the wonderful things is that the Littlest Hunter, who's actually JB, he had the ability to talk to animals. Now, he could talk to animals like all people. Animals knew what we were saying. But the difference was that the animals could talk to him, and he knew what the animals were saying.
Wow, I bet that takes the story some pretty interesting places. I want to quickly read a letter, John, that you got from someone who had read your book. Dear author, John, my name is Sandy, and last week I read your book, The Littlest Hunter. I think that it was probably the best book I ever read because it's about the Hunter family moving west, and when they got there, all the animals were talking to that little boy, and I think that it is really cool that they could talk to him. I also like the pictures. I thought that they were very pretty. I can't wait for the next book. From Sandy. Now that must feel so special to get a letter like that.
It was goosebumps from the time I got the letter. The person who gave her the book is 87 years old, and she wrote me a letter saying, this girl is in love with your storyline and wanted to know when the next story is going to be out. By the way, the next story will be out in October.
Wow, that's such a gift, John. Hi, I'm Steve Gadlin, the host of Steve Gadlin Star Makers. Thanks so much for watching our video. For more of tomorrow's stars of Hollywood and/or Broadway, click on my face to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I hope to see you again.